morning, welcome. If we can. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone who's joining us. We see the numbers going up. We're excited that you've decided to join us this morning. We'll just wait a few minutes for additional members to join. In the meanwhile, for those that are already with us, please can you make use of the chat function there? Just tell me what your name is and where you're from. So just your name and where you're joining us from this morning. I see Natasha from Centurion. Ursula from Josie, welcome. Paul from the East Rand. We've got Zika from Johannesburg. We've got Funa Nani from Cape Town. Welcome, Nika from Pretoria. We've got quite a lot. Tanvir, Alfred, welcome. Hello, Ngobile from Cape Town. Nomkosi Sikudu from Witbank. We have quite a diverse group this morning. And we'll just wait a few minutes for others to join. But in the meanwhile, just keep introducing yourself in the chat function. Nomkosi. Just welcome. We've got Stefan Meyer there from Centurion as well. So we have quite a bit of representation from Centurion this morning. Forgive me if I butcher your name, but we've got Gervis or Gervis from Kigali. Welcome, welcome. That's our first international. That's Prudence Mahlaba from Pochabelo. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let others join us so that when we start, we don't miss anyone. So keep introducing yourself. Violan Pillay from Pietermaritzburg. That's where I'm from. So welcome, Florence Nkosi from East Rand, more from East Rand. Sifiso's mom. Okay, awesome. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin at 4 minutes past on the dot. We just going to give it 1 more minute, and then we'll officially start at 4 minutes past. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see we've got a bit more people joining. Welcome, welcome. I think we will officially start. So it's 4 minutes past. Good morning, and so welcome to the Pursuit of Academic Excellence webinar that is hosted by the Golden Key UCT chapter in collaboration with OPSS, which is the Organizational Psychology Students Society. We have our main speaker today that will be joining us, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. I'm Hlengiwe Nyoni, and I am your co-host for this webinar. I'm the Personal and Professional Development Director at the Golden Key chapter, alongside Marcy Alaso, and you will see her later on in the session. But to do introductions on our speakers today, we have our keynote that will be coming from Sifiso Nxumalo, who is a summa cum laude University of Witwatersrand graduate and currently an Oxford University graduate. We can't wait to hear the insights that he has to share with us on how we can pursue an academically excellent life. And then thereafter, we will hear from fellow Golden Key member and chairperson for OPSS, who will also be sharing some nuggets of wisdom relating to academic excellence and the pursuits thereof. I'm totally excited, and I can't wait to hear what they have to share. But during their sessions, please feel free to share all your questions in the Q&A section that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We're keen to have all your questions, and if anything comes up as we're going along the webinar, just pop your questions in the Q&A session, and these will be facilitated by Marcy at a later stage. So welcome, sit back and enjoy. Handing over to Sifiso.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is in good condition. Everyone is healthy and happy under the circumstances. By way of introduction, my name is Sifiso Nxumalo. I am a current BCL student at the University of Oxford. I'm currently based in Oxford and may be based there for the next couple of years. I'm here to speak to you today about academic excellence, and for my own credibility, I would want to have 3 disclaimers at the beginning of this. So first and foremost, like any good lawyer, I must state that I don't have a monopoly over academic excellence and the pursuit thereof. I am merely here to sort of share my own experiences, which are very much subjective based on my own experience, and I would never claim that these are based on any scientific evidence other than myself. The second disclaimer is that as a lawyer, most of my training is in law, so my studies are very much law-based, and I would assume that in other respects, you would have, or in other disciplines, you would have different methods of studying and approaching academic rigor. So with that being said, and then the last point is that academic excellence is, for me particularly, has never been about having the greatest marks, but it's about being consistent in achieving your academic goals, whatever they may be. It could be that you are looking to get 70s or 60s. At Oxford, to be honest, I'm happy if I get a 62. Like, that's a good mark, and I feel very good and happy about myself. So yeah, with that being said, I will just speak a little bit about myself, and apologies if I sound a little bit off. It's kind of difficult speaking to a screen with no faces. So please do bear with me as I try to navigate this. But to begin with, my name is, as I said, Sifiso Nxumalo. I did my undergraduate degree, LLB, at the University of the Witwatersrand, or WITS, from the year 2014, and I graduated in 2017. During my time there, I did about 25 courses. I had distinctions in 24 of those courses. I will share my transcript because someone asked me to. I will not mention any names. So just give me a minute. Okay, I think you can see my screen. Let me just maximize that. So these were my grades, I suppose. As I said, 2017, and then going all the way down. As I said, the key for me was consistency more than it was getting certain marks. So I had always in my first year, always in my second year, or not always in my third year. Or in my third year, I had a C with 62%. I will confess that I probably failed that paper, the exam. I won't lie. It was an open book exam, and I don't think I prepared accordingly for it. But nevertheless, you can't spell civil procedure without a C. So that's one thing there. And my spelling is quite good nowadays. And then in my fourth year, it was back to dominance, I suppose. I got A's and all that kind of stuff. So I will stop sharing my screen. Cool. So now, when I finished my undergraduate, I then went on to work at Bowman's, which is part of the top 5 law firms in Africa. I worked in the M&A department and in the employment department, which were really like great learning experiences. And then I moved on to the Constitutional Court. I clerked at the Constitutional Court for 18 months under the tutelage and guidance of Justice Kampempe and Justice Stephen Majid. Did that for 18 months, and then I decided to apply to universities overseas, which I then did. I applied to Oxford, Harvard, Columbia, Duke, a few other universities, about 8 in total. I got admission into all of them, including full scholarships. And then I decided to come to Oxford for a very particular reason, and that's because the BCL, or the Bachelor of Civil Laws, is allegedly the most prestigious law degree that a student could have, a law student could have. So I thought to myself that would be a good challenge, that would be something that would be worth pursuing. At the current moment, I realize why they say it's the most prestigious degree in the world. It doesn't come easy, but it's a great learning experience. With that being said, I hope that everyone will, ask questions, and this will be interactive, and I'm happy to speak about anything really. So moving on to sort of like what were my key takeaways and in what I think contributed to me achieving my success. So I'm going to speak honestly and frankly, and hopefully whatever I say will make sense. And if it doesn't, please do hold me accountable. But the first thing is that I think you should always start with the end in mind. So start with the end process at the beginning, meaning that, and I took this principle from a book that I read 2014, called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if I'm not mistaken. And that was one of the principles which I found to be the most interesting and the most important, particularly because what it does is that it says that you should picture yourself after the end of the road. Like, the example that they use there is quite extreme. They say that picture yourself on your deathbed or at your funeral, and someone is reading what you have done. What would you want people to say about you? How would you want people to sort of, how would you want people to remember you and celebrate you? But I then took that and I domesticated it to something much more smaller for me, particularly when I look at my own academic success. I thought to myself, how do I want my academic process to look like? What do I want my academic process to be? So I then started setting up goals. And this sounds very, self-motivation, self-help, but it really is quite helpful to have a mind map and a goal as to what you want to do at the end of your degree, because then it makes it easier for you to start navigating and plotting your way and achieving whatever goals you want to actually achieve. So a short story is that when I started doing law, and I did law for very particular reasons that have to do with my mom and my dad, and just a range of factors. But when I started doing law, I met a guy called Dominic Khumalo, and he was giving a talk at Men's Res where I lived, and he said he's going to study overseas. And to me, that was like I was mind blown. He was a guy that had graduated. As a kid from East Rand, the idea of studying overseas, to do your master's overseas, was foreign. I'd never really thought of it. So, and then that same night, I went back home and I started messaging all these universities that I wanted to go through, that I actually wanted to go to. I applied to 3 of them. The first one was Harvard. The second, I emailed them. I didn't apply. I emailed Harvard, Oxford, and Yale. Harvard was the only one was the only university that I think responded. And they responded and said, we can't take you now, but apply after 5 years or 4 years once you've achieved your undergraduate degree, because for law is a postgraduate degree and not an undergraduate degree. So we can't offer it to you unless you have a degree. So at that point, I'd set my end goal. My degree now was for me to achieve marks that were good enough for me to get to Harvard. It wasn't for me to get marks that were good enough for me to just, get a job at a law firm. So I then started working from a point of view of saying that I want to be competitive globally. And hence I started writing my goals, which were, I would write my marks, the marks that I wanted to achieve for each and every degree, for each and every course, each and every year. I would sit down at the beginning of the year and write results. And I would make them as ridiculous and as outlandish as possible. So for one of the courses, I said I was going to get 100%, knowing very well that I would never get 100%. But what that did is that it forced me to focus on the output of achieving 100%, even if I got 80, but I would still be great. I would still be phenomenal by just getting, I might not be perfect, but I'll still be phenomenal. I'll still be brilliant. And that's really what sets the pace for me throughout my years. So I think it's very key for you to understand what it is that you want to achieve from the get-go. And you want to make sure that these plans are specific each year, are specific to each term, to each course. And then you start plotting your way in terms of that. So that's the first important thing. The second thing that I would want to sort of focus on is the fact that you have to have a reason why, which is very interrelated. Why are you studying the degree that you are studying? What are your interests? What do you inevitably want to do? And this is important because if you don't care if the degree is purely something that you want to do for purposes of just having a degree or just doing it because your parents have forced you to do it, your output, your mentality is much more different than someone who's doing it because they need to feed their family at the end of the day, or someone who is getting this degree because they are the first generation who has the capacity of changing the sort of course of their entire family. So your mindset very much is determined by your reasons. Your essence, why you wake up, why do you want to dedicate as much time as you want. And, we shouldn't romanticize poverty and struggles and say that, you must be a first generation and that's the only way that you can, excel. Sometimes it can be something as futile as saying that, or not as futile, I don't want to use, I retract that word futile. It could be something as aesthetic as saying that you just want to have a degree, you want to have a doctorate, you want to have a master's degree in a particular course. It doesn't have to be birthed from pain and suffering. It could be birthed from something else. So yeah, that's that. And then how to process information. So for me, whenever I read material and whenever I focus on a particular subject, I have three distinct questions. That question is why. So it would be, why am I reading? What is the point? What is the point of this doctrine? And then the last question would be how. So how does it apply? In what context? In what way is it relevant? And so usually those are the three things. So it would be why, what, and how. And I approach of my learning using that. So whenever I open up a course, if I'm doing, for instance, an example that I'll use right now is that I'm doing a course called Unjust Enrichment. The course is really justice, which really at the expense of someone else without there being a just basic defense. Now, I'm a lawyer who's interested in private law, and this is at the core of understanding some of the doctrinal methodology that exists or underpins private law and the law of obligations more broadly. And it's quite a fascinating topic for me because it really is, it goes against the natural urge of a lawyer who wants to focus on obligations, but how are obligations triggered towards a defendant when the defendant hasn't done anything to trigger that. So to use an example of where this course is most relevant is a couple of years ago, there was that girl, a lady from, I think it was it wasn't UWC, it was Walter Sisulu University, who received 14 million from NAPSIS as it was an administrative error, and she was enriched by 14 million. So that is unjust enrichment. Why should she give the money, right? Should she pay the money? Should she give the money back? The answer is yes to all of that. But the question is why? How do you find those principles? And that's really what I'm focusing on in that particular course. There's a variety of different examples that we can use, but I think that's the one that most South Africans would sort of understand because it was such a prominent or central topic a couple of years ago. And then just to look at my notes. So also with learning, with the process of learning and reading, there's a very interesting quote by a guy called Herbert Smith. He's a Nobel Prize winner from, I think, 1997, if I'm not mistaken. He said that, and he was an economist, by the way, who was concerned with bounded rationality and how that influences consumers and purchasing stuff. So he said that information consumes attention. Hence, a wealth of information results in a poverty of attention. And I find that to be particularly true in today's time, where we find that, social media and just Google and everything that exists sort of demands our attention and our time, because you can literally do a lot of things. There's a lot of information available. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of platforms for you to sort of do different things, and that tends to take away from your ultimate attention. That takes away from what you should be doing at the moment. So for me, I've always tried my best to, whenever I'm learning, I try my best to remove distractions, try my best to remove, so that would be switching off my phone, that would be reading in a room that's quiet, or there's classical music or Afro jazz. But Afro jazz is a bad thing because I end up dancing, but classical music generally works. And then if I need to be energetic, I will play some Afro jazz because I think it's a good injection of energy. But really what you want to do is that you want to make sure that your attention, which is the most prized commodity that you have today, you want to make sure that it's not competing with various other information that's actually out there, but you are actually concentrating on the task at hand by eliminating all these other distractions. And then the last point that I'd like to make, I think I'll make it the last point, even if it shouldn't have been the last point, is how to approach academic reading. So I use a method called gutting. When you gut a book, it's called gutting, or gutting a book, or gutting an academic literature. Gutting is essentially the process of reading a text so that you can most quickly find what the central thesis is and get the relevant information or arguments made and the evidence to support it. So how I go about gutting is that I would read. So if it's a book, I will read. I'm just going to take this book, which is sad, but I will read, the cover obviously, but read the back cover because it usually explains certain things, and then I would focus on the table of content on the index. primarily because I need to know what are the main points that this author wants to make throughout the book, how will they make them, and then sometimes I'll look at the cases, like so I'll look at the bibliography, what sources are they relying on to make that point. But once I've done that, which is usually like a once-off exercise, once I've done that, then I will focus on very concrete sections or chapters. And when I do that, I will read let's move away from books for now, but this will equally apply to books. If I'm reading an academic article, I will read the introduction and then I'll read the conclusion. And I won't read the text for that very moment, because what I want to see is, what is he arguing? So what is the main purpose of this paper, which I'll find in the introduction, and then I will read the conclusion. And then the conclusion will usually tell you how he hasn't made his argument or how she's made her argument, depending on how good the author is. They will say, in this paper, I've argued the following, blah, 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 and therefore my thesis has been proven, my central thesis remains true. That's what I would do first. And then what I then do is that I will go through the paper, but I'm skimming through it. I'm not reading it from top to bottom and reading it in detail. Rather, what I'm doing is I'm reading it to understand how he then supports the central thesis that I have actually identified. And gutting is a method that I still use at Oxford, and in fact, it's promoted at Oxford more than anything, where you have a large body of literature, and you have two competing interests. The first interest is that you want to read as widely as possible, so read all of the academic texts, but also you want to get in depth in each and every one of them, and understand the topic quite properly, rather than just reading it casually. So what gutting does is that gutting strikes a balance. It strikes a balance between reading widely, but also reading to understand what the central thesis of each and every author is and how they are contributing to the overall topic. And this is important. I think this is the most important skill, is learning how to gut. It's learning how to read text, whether be it, so an example is that I had a text that I had to read, which was about 100 pages long for advanced property, one of the courses that I do here. That 100 page article, the most relevant, the summary that I came up with was a page long. I submitted that page when I was writing my essay. I got a distinction for it, for my interpretation of what he was actually writing. Because when you're doing academic reading, we tend to emphasize retaining a lot of information, but really it's about having a deeper understanding of the point, of the central point that this person is trying to make. And it doesn't matter if you've crammed what he says from page 1 to page 100, if you've missed what the central thesis is. And the central thesis is what I tend to focus. I think the central thesis comes out from the introduction and the conclusion, and then you look at the rest of the work for purposes of just sort of understanding how he supports his arguments. And then another point with that is, I would just simply say that it's also important to learn by examples. I'm a person who, for every single thing that I learned, for every single topic that I learn, I have a very random example that is actually attached to it. Because the only way for you to retain information, the only way for you to actually properly test yourself and know that you know what you are doing, is for you to actually domesticate it. Don't speak about it in very abstract terms, but speak about it in your own words, using your own view, using your own examples. So you'll find that I will use examples that are unique to me, because that's how I would best explain things. Whenever I call my friends and people that are very close to me, I will usually tell them about what I'm learning and what I'm actually doing in a particular course. But then what I would do there is that I would actually use examples that would be easy for them to understand. And therefore I know that I actually understood the concept, and I'm not just regurgitating what the author says, but I actually understand what his central thesis is. And that really is that is the purpose of university. I think university is there to create intellectuals and scholars who understand what they're talking about, rather than people who repeat knowledge, right? We're not here to, particularly, we're not, with all respect, we're not here to repeat what all the authors have written and what they've actually said. You want to be able to understand it, digest it, and critique it and add to that conversation. That's what universities should be. They should be intellectual hubs rather than plagiarism centers or centers where we just plagiarize ideas. At least that is my humble opinion. And then I just want to close off with really 2 points. The first point is that I think you should have academic friends that you have for purposes of academia, people that you can call to bounce ideas off, to hold each other accountable. I have a lot of people. So I have that's actually a lie. I have about 2 or 3 people that I really talk to, but that's a lot for me. And they hold me accountable. They will question me on what I've learned. They'll ask me to explain certain principles to them, and that really forces me to digest the work that I've actually been doing and explain it to them in less dramatic terms. And then the second point, which is a very quick point, is that academic success isn't a routine, right? It's not accidental. It's very deliberate. I would be lying to you if I said that I graduated the way that I did, that I came to Oxford by accident, that it was merely, some mystical thing that happened in the background. It was very deliberate. It was very calculated. It was knowing each and every step of the process and committing myself to it, and not resting as in not sleeping. You should sleep. That there's health benefits to that, that scientists and other people have spoken about. So I'm not encouraging you to live an unhealthy lifestyle. But you want to be deliberate, be very intentional, be very calculated. Don't leave anything to chance. If you have a lecturer that isn't teaching you the way that you want them to teach you, then you become proactive and you change classes, or you write to someone and say, we're not getting value for money here. NAFSAS might be paying for me, or someone else might be paying for me, but this is not value for money. We need someone who's going to come up and teach us properly, and so forth. So really, success is in the routine. Your success lies in the routine. It lies in what you do each and every day. And yeah, I think I will close off here and hand over to Amy, if I'm not mistaken.
Thanks. Thank you so much for that, Sifiso. Thank you so much for that nugget, for those nuggets of wisdom pertaining to academic excellence. Some of the things that I was able to derive from your talk was the importance of having a goal in mind from the onset, having a mind map, and then having a strong why. Also your why, what, and how approach. As you engage with material, I can see how that would obviously give you sort of a multifaceted, multidimensional approach to the content, and in doing so, you're able to retain a lot more. You spoke about music and Afro jazz. I mean, different people will have different likings and tastes in terms of the music and what works for them. For me, generally, I find some sort of study music on YouTube that generally does the job. The importance of understanding that our attention is a precious commodity, and when we understand that, then we'll be more intentional with how we choose to share it. And then the gutting approach, which is an important approach when you're consuming large volumes of content, and then having academic friends to hold us accountable, and then whom we can learn as we teach with, and that the importance of just noting that academic excellence is not accidental. It's not accidental. It takes intention, and it takes routine and committing to a process. Thank you so much for that. We'll hand over now to Amy Thompson, who is a Golden Key member as well as OPSS chairperson. You can take the stage, Amy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
is my mic?
Can. It's perfect. We can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Thingiwe. So my name is Amy Thompson. I am chairperson of the Organizational Psychology Student Society. I am pursuing my honors right now in organizational psychology, and I double majored in undergrad in psychology and organizational psychology. So I'd just like to reiterate what Sifiso said. I don't have monopoly over academic excellence. These are just some nuggets of wisdom that I've learned throughout my experience as a university student and studying psychology, learning about the mind, short-term memory, long-term memory, all of that. So this session, I will just be sharing with you guys in 10 minutes 10 psychological study tricks that will boost your brain power, because and over time is everything and what you think you become. So my first trick is context-dependent learning. So science has shown that if you take an exam in the exact same spot as where you were sitting for the entire semester, you're better able to recall the material and better able to do better on the exam. So the reason being is that your mind associates some information with the environment that you learned it in. So the environment is kind of like a cue or a trigger for your mind. To give you an example of this, let's say you're in the kitchen and your mind is inevitably going to associate that space with cooking and recipes, and will be pulling out everything that you know on that matter based on where you are, based on that environment. So now you might say, Amy, my exam is not in the classroom where I learned it, at least pre-COVID it wasn't. So maybe it's in an auditorium or in a sports center like a UCT, etc. So what you can do is you can make your desk mimic the same format and setting as when you studied for the class. So maybe you had your water over there, your pencils over there, and your notes were maybe a bit tilted. So you can mimic the pattern during the exam, and that should be able to mimic your brain into thinking, hey, maybe this looks like math class. So the second trick is to change it up. So this tip might be a little confusing because it seems a little bit of opposite to tip number one, but just, yeah. So changing the environment. Don't always study in the exact same spot, simply because if you study for math in the kitchen and you study for math in the bus, and then you study for math in the library, the brain is going to think, hey, maybe she's using these math formulas a lot in these different environments. Maybe they're crucial to his survival. Let us solidify and make these math formulas more lasting because she's using them everywhere, so they must be important. So the brain's kind of funny in that way, I have to say. Number 3, pre-testing and the fluency illusion. So there's proof that you do learn from your mistakes and that you should make them a lot. So if you failed in the past, don't worry, it's actually to your benefit to an extent. So a number of articles I've read recommend that you do a practice test before you study for the material. So pre-testing primes your brain to get ready to take that exam, and also to get ready to see that material and that information presented in a question format. Also, pre-testing yourself before you study for the material allows you to get rid of the fluency illusion. So this is very common with students, that time when you think you know this, if it's a multiple choice question exam, I'll be fine, I'll find my way around it, it's cool, I know this. But it shows that, oopsie, maybe you don't know it as well as you might have thought you did. So it helps us by breaking that bias and that fallacy, and that you can actually apply a more realistic approach to studying and being more successful in that sense. So number 4, retrieval practice. This is pretty similar to the last point. So just practice, practice, practice is the essential message here. It helps you recall information much better than simply rereading the material. There is no mystery to us, and we have science to back this up on this. So practice tests, not just pre-testing before you start studying, but practice tests throughout, getting ready to see that information in a question format. Number 5 is metacognition. So it's important that halfway through our studying, we take a step back and understand and be aware of our thought process and what we know during our studying. So I recommend that you make a study guide and a simple checklist of all the theories, concepts, and formulas that you need to know. And halfway through your studies, just stop, take a break, and just write down everything that you believe that you remember, to be more self-aware of where you are. And this provides you valuable feedback because it shows you the present and how long you have to go until you stop studying and you can be ready for the exam. So number 6, sleep on it. This is the most important trick, I would say, because my lecturer in undergrad psychology, Leanne, she would drill this into our heads and tune us so often when she could sense that we had done all-nighters, because it does way more harm than good. And I'm going to tell you about that now. So when we're awake, we weaken our memory connections. If you're awake for too long, connections between the neurons, so the synapses, they weaken and become saturated. This just means that you'll have more difficulty remembering information. So if you're trying to cram for an exam and stay awake for long periods of time and go on little sleep or 2 hours before the exam, you're going to burn out your neurons and you won't remember anything. That's the gist of it. Sleeping allows your brains to make new connections and also to solidify connections, like I said. So several studies, primarily on adults, have shown that sleep improves procedural memory, i.e. skills and procedures, as well as declarative memory. So REM sleep, I'm sure we know what REM sleep is, rapid eye movement sleep. It's the deepest sleep you can go into when you're dreaming and all that. And slow wave sleep have been implicated in memory consolidation. So a lack of REM sleep is associated with poor recall. So I recommend doing your practice test in the morning so that when you wake up all fresh and all the information is solidified and those connections have been made, you're going to see that your hand will have a mind of its own, and you're just going to remember everything that you learned the night before after you're well rested. So please do not neglect your sleep. That's if you take anything away from what I'm saying today. It's essential. So 7 is to have consistent brain exercises. So neuroscience say that fun games like Sudoku, puzzles, and even reading a novel on the side of your school and university, this helps. So when it comes to studying, you're going to have a more easier time than, say, if you were just dormant and then suddenly make this huge effort to prepare for an exam. So it's the same as exercise and benching. So if you try to lift a 2-ton weight after never warming up and never weight training ever in your life, you're going to get hurt. And that's pretty much the same as the brain. So number 8, connections and associations. Improve your memory through associations. Basically, when I tell you to think about a car, I'm pretty sure you don't just see a car in your head. You're going to see a car on the street, maybe people around the car, maybe a car in a parking lot. There are so many things that are associated with cars, like colors and speed, maybe. So if your brain thinks in connections and makes them constantly, why should you just study and think in isolated chunks that are not really related to one another? So next time you make a list, let's say plant, mug, and desk, try to make them related. So if you go more creatively and ridiculously, you're going to remember it better. So let's just make up a story like the plant on the desk knocked over my mug because it fell over onto it. I don't know. You're going to be able to remember those things far better if there's a story around it rather than just repeating it over and over in your head. One of them is going to slip out eventually, especially if it's longer than 3 items or 3 concepts or whatever you're trying to remember. So number 9, mental hooks. I'm going to ask you guys to close your eyes for a second now. And I just want you to think of a polar bear. I'm just going to give you a second just to think of a polar bear. Okay, think of polar bear, like the words, or did you, in your mind, see an image of a polar bear? Surprise, surprise, we think in images, or the vast majority of the time. So human beings retain information much better if it is visual and in color. So these images are literally mental hooks that help you to retrieve information from your long-term memory. A way you can use this to your advantage is by using mind maps. So mind maps allow us to be visual, use color, use little doodles and images to create connections, like my previous point, and is basically the best tool you have to help you improve your memory and remember what you study and be ready for your exam, essentially. Number 10, active learning is key. So the research has been done. It is factual. More complex thought processes that engage more senses are more beneficial to studying because it involves a greater number of neuron connections and more neurological crosstalk. I'm recommending it now, so I don't have time to go into depth about it, but I do really encourage you to look it up because it is key, and you can see that just with the number of articles that have been written about it with regards to studying and memory and brain power. So that's come to the end of my 10 tricks and tips, just speaking on the pursuit of academic excellence from a psychological perspective with regards to my studies. So with that being said, I'd just like to thank you, Golden Key, for inviting me here today. And I hope that some of the attendees managed to learn some tricks and benefit from my knowledge and insight that I've tried to share with you today. So thank you. I can pass back to Hlingiwe.
Thank you so much, Amy. I learned quite a lot in that session with cute polar bear images. And just to recap on some of the things that I learned, first things first, what you said is that, you what you think you become, which is so important because really everything that we do and say sort of starts off as a thought in our mind. And so the thoughts that we hold are very important, even pertaining to our academic life, which ties very well to the previous speaker in terms of nothing is accidental. And so when you're intentional with even that starting sort of point, it's important because it gives direction to the rest of your life and how you carry it out. And you spoke about creating the kind of environment that is conducive for your learning. And you talked about, okay, my handwriting is failing me here, but like protecting ourselves from the illusion that we have it covered. And that always happens where you feel like you're confident with some elements of the content, and then you sort of kind of want to believe that you're now sitting at a place where you can excel academically, only to find when you do things like testing yourself and retrieval practice that it's quite shaky. And when you're able to do those things, then you sort of have an understanding of where you're sitting in terms of what it is that you do know and what you don't know, which is really great. You spoke about metacognition, being aware of our thought processes, which ties back nicely to your first point, and the importance of sleeping well, but not overdoing it. It's just, getting enough, enough hours to make sure that we allow our brain to recharge, but also just not overdoing that, because that's also unhealthy. And you talked about how we wouldn't just walk up into a gym and carry some overweight, some weights that are not our size or something that we haven't practiced. So it's important that you gradually build towards that strength, even when it comes to your academics. And then you spoke about creating connections. I really try to do that because I've seen how it works when you create a crazy story in your mind about something. Because it's so crazy, you're able to retain it, and then you're able to recall the content when you need to, as opposed to just trying to cram information for later. And then you spoke about mental hooks, and I really, I'm so grateful that you decided to just come and share your knowledge with us today. We're going to go into the Q&A section that will be facilitated by Marcy now, and she'll be addressing the quick questions, and she'll maybe name the specific people that she's hoping will respond. But please feel free to sort of pick up on an answer that you would like to give, and let's pop those questions into the Q&A section. I know that some have been sent directly to Marcy, but if anyone else has any more questions, please still pop them into the Q&A section. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sifiso and Amy, for the amazing presentations. I have learned a lot. We have a number of questions. I think I'll begin with Jewa. They sent a question to the chat, and it goes to Sifiso. If you would please be able to answer. The question reads, since your academic path seemed to be quite smooth in bits, 24 out of 25 distinctions, did you ever feel like you were not challenged enough? Did you miss the competition? If you'd please help answer, Sifiso.
So it's a very tricky question because I didn't see competition, but no. So to begin with, I think did I feel like I was not challenged enough? No, I wouldn't say that I felt like I wasn't challenged enough, but I felt that I had more to offer, and I felt that I could enjoy a much more rigorous academic experience internationally than I did at the time. Did I miss the competition? I will deliberately not answer that question. Yeah, I think yeah, it was an experience. So one principle that I've always lived by. I don't think anything was smooth. I think it was difficult to achieve some of the things that I did achieve, but it's really about that consistency and sort of like trying your best to make sure that you leave nothing to chance. You know, I mean, to give you a much more practical breakdown, and I say this with Amy's advice, and I accept and I acknowledge her advice as being true, that we should sleep more. But when I was doing my VITS degree, I think I would spend about 2 to 3 hours weekly, not weekly, sorry, daily, like sleeping. It would have, I tried my best to learn as much as I could to understand each and everything. My mom is in the group somewhere. She could attest to this. She would tell you that I would sleep at very late hours of the night. I still do right now. But that's because I am obsessed with being at the very top, at the very best level that I could ever be. And I think that I'm always just keen on dedicating myself to it. So yeah, I wouldn't say that it was smooth, but I think when you morph into something extraordinary, even the most difficult task looks very ordinary. That's what I would say.
Okay, we have another question. You have so much motivation, like you motivate yourself a lot. What advice would you give to people who struggle with motivation? How should they keep up with that spirit of I have to achieve this, I have to get this done? Sifiso?
I'll just keep my mic and my video on so I don't have to go back and forth. But the point about motivation, you see, I will be very honest with you. I don't think motivation is real. I think it's illusionary. I think you have reasons for doing certain things, but the idea that you'll watch a video on YouTube from a motivational speaker or read a book about how to achieve certain things, it's something that I did a lot when I was like in first year. But after a while, I realized that it all says the same thing. It says work hard, believe in yourself, do A, B, and C. It's like a set formula. So what I believe in is discipline. I think discipline is the most important thing that you could ever acquire. It's the most important skill. I think I in undergraduate. So what I did is that I actually drew up a timetable for myself, which incorporated when I would have classes and when I would study. And I would say to myself that I'd wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. Sometimes I would struggle to wake up, but I'd get someone to call me, which I still do today. If I struggle, if I know that I'm going to sleep relatively late and I still need to wake up at 5, I'll get someone else to call me so that I can be up and do work. But I used to have a timetable and I used to schedule each and everything. I would schedule when I would go eat. I would schedule when I would study, when I would go on a walk, when I would spend time with friends. I would schedule every single thing, when I would watch a movie. And that's because you want to create a routine and a system that allows you to be disciplined and allows you to acquire that. And I think there's a phrase that I saw most recently that said, discipline is a form of self-love. And I agree with that. I think that is truly it. Like if you really want to achieve something, you know that the discipline is something that you can't do without. So I can't speak to the motivation part, but I can speak to the discipline part. And if you stick to it, it doesn't matter whether it's raining, whether or not your girlfriend has broken up with you, doesn't matter what's going on, except for even if there's a death or something along those lines. But generally you show up and you show out, regardless of how you feel personally. And I think the timetable was something that really helped me do that. And it's something that, it builds a work ethic that you maintain even after varsity. So I no longer have a timetable, but my mind is programmed to function in a particular way.
Okay, thank you. In the Q&A section, we have 3 questions. One from Tebo. He says, "Thank you for the interesting talk. My question was, what were your challenges that could have derailed your progress at BITS? What challenges derailed you?"
So in terms of challenges, I think there are plenty. So one of the challenges that for me personally, I grew up not reading a lot. So I didn't read a lot of books for fun. I read, in English class, whatever was prescribed was what I would read. And even then I would read that like in a very terrible way. Like I'll just read it to understand it, or even look at the summaries online. But so the first thing that I had to get away from is reading, which I didn't really enjoy in my first year. To open up a technical article or a book or a case was quite daunting. So that was the first challenge, was getting myself into an academic mind, or reading quite a lot, reading quite often. And with that, what I started doing was I started reading for fun. I started reading things that I enjoyed, just to build the habit of reading, just to build my capacity for reading. And over time, it then became better. Another challenge that I had was that I have a lot to say. So whenever I wrote question papers, I would always run out of time. In my first exam, I probably finished one question out of 4 exams. I finished one question, and the rest I did. And that, I realized that affected me quite badly. So what I did was that I started Googling, because Google is the greatest thing nowadays, Googled how to write faster. And funny enough, there's articles about this, about using a heavier pen for ball practice and stuff like that, and being more concise. So I actually studied that. And I ended up learning to write quite quickly, so that I could still get everything that I wanted to sort of say, but then not run out of time. But it also comes with another skill, which is knowing how to answer questions properly, which I don't think that we sort of learn. And the quality of your answer is based on the quality of the question asked. So if the question and your comprehension of that particular question, if the question is asked well and you comprehend it correctly, then your answer should speak directly to it. Whereas before, I think I would just, they would ask me about a particular topic, but then because I wanted to show them that I knew everything about this, I would go into a historical analysis, a future analysis, but none of those were relevant for that particular question. So I learned how to write faster, but I also learned how to properly deconstruct a question and then answer it quite pointedly. And I think that was something that I did. Another sort of big distraction, I guess, is social life, right? Everyone wants to go to varsity and meet new people, interact, go out, do all these great things that youth do. But that potentially could have derailed me, but it wasn't that much of a factor because, I'm a little bit boring. So I didn't have to worry about it that much. It sort of solved itself. It was a problem that solved itself over time.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that. I like the deconstruction of questions. We should definitely do that. Then another question to you, Sifiso. How did you manage clerking at the CC? And is it compulsory to have a master's to clerk there? You mentioned that in your background.
Sure. So to answer that very quickly, you don't need a master's. The only thing that you need is an LLB. There's not even a mark requirement. But obviously, when I applied, there was about 900 applications. So you obviously have to be competitive, even though there's no minimum requirement. You must still make sure that you are competitive in whatever spirit you possibly can. I had about 5 interviews with 5 judges on the same day. So what the process that when you apply, you get shortlisted, and then the judges will pick who they want to interview. So you can have, I think there's people that have had 9 or 10 interviews because there's 11 judges. But I had 5 and I did the 5 and I got the job and it was great. So I can't really speak to this, and the person you can reach out to me personally and I'll take you through it. I really don't mind, so that we don't hold people up who are not in that specific field. But no, you don't need a master's. You just need an LLB, and you have like a writing sample requirements and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, there's just be as competitive.
Okay, thank you very much. A question for Amy. Amy, yes. Any tips on time management for full-time students who work also? It just seems like there aren't enough hours in the day to work, study, and get enough rest while taking care of our health, our psychological health. Okay. If you please help answer that, Amy. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, as a psychology student, psychological health is well-being is a top priority for everyone. I think it should be. But I'm just going to start off from like a black and white perspective with just establishing a schedule. So give important tasks top priority. So start by writing down the essential things that you must accomplish every day, such as going to work or attending classes in your case, and then include your secondary tasks. So after those items have been accounted for in your schedule, start filling in the rest of your week with the other things you should be doing, and then also individualize your approach. So tackle the most important projects first, but also pay attention to when you're most productive, and also give attention to how much psychological time you need to refuel and focus on yourself and self-care. I don't know how Sifiso feels about this, because he said he wasn't even sleeping in his university years, but for me it's a top priority, and I think it should be for everyone else. And then, as I was talking about priorities, just try to evaluate your priorities in order to manage your time effectively. It is important to first understand some of the problems that might be causing these issues that you're having. By taking a serious look at how you spend your time each week, you'll be able to see areas where you lose significant amounts of time after keeping track of your schedule for a few days. You might be surprised to see how much time is wasted each week. So common time wasters like checking emails, dealing with clutter and disorganization, playing video games, social media, watching televisions. So even if you're only spending a little bit of time on each of these activities, it can definitely add up over time, even those small little sources of distraction. I know Sifiso was talking about this earlier, getting rid of distractions and concentrating on your work. So yeah, they can start interfering with your ability to accomplish the tasks that you want to get done. So really just try to evaluate your week and then establish a schedule. That's probably what I'd say.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. I think we have the last question. It doesn't say who it's directed to, but it's any tips on getting back on track with your studies after disappointment? Do you want to answer that, or should Sifiso answer that? I don't know.
Maybe Sifiso would like to answer that?
Sure. So that's a very difficult question, how to come back. But I think, it's very difficult to answer that question without dismissing the importance of your feelings. I think, we all get disappointed from time to time, and it's the most horrible thing. It's the most horrible feeling that you could ever have. And there's nothing wrong with feeling bad and feeling a particular way about it. That's perfectly fine. Go through your emotions and all of those things. But for me, the most important thing is that, after you've went through the process of disappointment and being sad, you then have to ask yourself really practically, what did you do wrong? What happened? What changed, right? And usually I've moved away. Maybe someone might accuse me of being a narcissistic person, but I've moved away from saying that I was wrong in a particular situation or I'm not good enough. But I look at it as a situation, that the situation was wrong. The situation wasn't well, or people weren't prepared for certain things, and things didn't work out. So I move away from individualizing things and making it seem like it's me who's incompetent or is unable to achieve certain goals. And I think once you start speaking from an external point of view to once you start speaking to a external point rather than an internal point, it then makes it easier for you to start getting out of the rut, for you to start getting out of feeling bad for yourself. But also an important point, I think, is that once you've actually identified where you went wrong. Most of us tend to disengage. We tend to move away from something, but in fact, that's what you should engage more. You should engage even more when it comes to things that you find uncomfortable. So I've had courses that I don't enjoy. I've had courses that I absolutely detest, but I ended up doing well in them because I would dedicate myself to sort of engaging with those particular topics more. I would not disengage. I would not just walk away from them. I would confront them head on and say that this is a particular weakness. This is something that I don't enjoy, but I will engage with it even more. I will read more about it. I will extend it more. I will utilize all the resources that I have. If you're at a university, you have all the resources available to you. You have lecturers, tutors, support staff, people that work with your support structure. I think it's called in Viz, I think it's called the mental health unit. I'm not sure if it's still there, and if that kind of stuff. Like, you want to make sure that you immerse yourself in all those sort of things, that you know that you're not alone, but also that the problem is really something that is solvable. Like, there's no problem in the world that you cannot solve, and it's really just assessing it, engaging with it, and then sort of like finding practical ways. Another point I just want to make very briefly is that it's also important for us to properly define I don't want to police people's disappointments, but for instance, failures, adversity shouldn't really matter in the greater scheme of like things, right? Because what you should be more concerned about is, what have I learned? What can I contribute to this? There's people that I know who didn't have the greatest of transcripts, but have one of the greatest successes ever. Like, I could mention economists, I could mention lawyers that, for instance, if you know Tembega Ngugai Tobe, no one knows what his transcript looks like, but he's a fantastic lawyer. No one will ever ask him if he passed a particular course or failed a particular course. I know a lot of great lawyers who are not defined by the grade average that they achieve at the end of the day. Like, you are actually better than that. You are more than that. There's so much that you could actually offer, and that's something that you should always be. You should always concentrate on what you get out of the degree, rather than a symbol. It's really it's about what you walk away with at the end of the day, right? That is the most important thing. I don't know if Amy has anything to add.
Hi. Yes, I definitely agree with everything you said. Failures are incredibly valuable to us in the sense that you'd rather want to make this type of error or this failure in your university years, because like you said, they're not that important in the greater scheme of things. So you'd rather learn them now than, say, when you're in the workplace and there's a more serious issue at hand. You've already learned from this mistake you've made previously, and then you can apply the correct procedure. Basically evaluating the situation, looking at external factors. Maybe it wasn't particularly your fault, but also just to be careful, because external biases can play a role in really just focusing on other people and what they might have done wrong, and then not looking internally. But also the same can apply for internal biases. So just try to evaluate the situation from both perspectives, and then you can really learn from it. And then, like I said, just apply the proper protocols and procedures in your future endeavors. So that's basically what I would say.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much. We have so many questions, but because of time, running out of time, we won't be able to answer them. But if possible, Sifiso and Amy will answer them maybe through email. If you could help with your email addresses, and then maybe people can send questions to you. You could answer them via email. So if you could just please put your emails on the chat, and that would be great for everyone else. Lingiwe.
Thank you
for the Q&A session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those insightful responses on the questions asked. Really, I learned a great deal from the session. I wish it could last much longer, when we could go through all the questions that people have. I just wanted to just to just read one of the comments from Yanalisa before we go to closing and thank yous. Is she said, Yanalisa says, it's always important to remember that failure or disappointment is best for learning more about yourself and your limits, evaluate those and find measures to address it so that you can turn these into positive movements. We're all about positivity. We're all about the Kaizen principle of continuous improvement. And that's why we even host such seminars, because we want to go from this level to the next and learning from our failures. It's one of those things that we as a country really just need to learn, that failure is it's a beautiful part of the process. And that's where we learn the most, because when we're not making mistakes, we're probably not doing something new. And so it's really important that we understand that, failure is just as an important part of our life process and our learnings as a success. And so thank you for that. One of the parting shots that I took from Sifiso was discipline is a form of self-love, and I will be taking that with me and trying to implement it in my daily life. And then from Amy, just really touching on just practical insights in terms of the importance of our psychological health and the things that we can do on a daily basis, taking this big elephant of a goal and turning it into small, manageable portions for us to be able to achieve these goals that we have. Thank you so much to our speakers, Sifiso, Amy. I don't know, I just want to jump into the screen and hug you both. Really, thank you for that insight. We really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to join us and to share those with us today. Thank you to Golden Key Southern Africa and their team that's always supporting us. Thank you to Golden Key UCT chapter. Thank you to OPSS UCT just for being present and contributing and just really supporting our initiatives. And then last but not least, thank you to all the attendees that took the time out of their day today to join us and to learn with us. We hope you'll be joining us for our other webinars that will be coming later in the year. Enjoy the rest of your day, and in a world where you can be anything, be excellent.